Hey everybody, welcome to Dad's Did of Pop Culture. Today I am reviewing my first TV Western. Not the first TV Western I've ever watched. I mean the first one I've done on the channel. Not the first Western that I've reviewed. That would be Blood Tomahawk. But so few people have watched that review, this might as well be the first Western that I've reviewed. The Western in question is Tate, a summer replacement series on NBC, replacing the Perry Como show, and Perry Como's company produced this Western. Sadly, not popular enough to get picked up as a fall for the fall season and get a full season. So we only got 13 episodes of this one, but I think they're well worth watching. The show was created by Harry Julian Fink, and you can see Kraft was the sponsor. Now, Fink was also the creator of a little something called Dirty Harry, and you can kind of see that a little bit in Tate. Not quite as aggressive, ruthless as Dirty Harry, but there are some similarities there. It starred David McLean, who was best known at the time as the Marlboro Man, i.e. the guy who was in all the Marlboro commercials, Marlboro cigarettes. They wanted to have that look of the Old West and wide vistas and freedom to go with their smoking. And so he was the guy who appeared in those commercials. I don't believe he ever had lines in those commercials. It was just sort of him, maybe on a horse, looking over the open plains and smoking a cigarette like a man would do. The setting of the show is 1871, the American West, and you'll find that episodes take place anywhere from Montana to Texas. Tate gets around quite a bit. He is he's a bounty hunter, essentially. So kind of exists in a moral gray area, but kind of also an anti-hero, maybe a little bit like a Jim Rockford, who doesn't want to get involved, but then if somebody's in trouble, will oftentimes get involved. But often the trouble comes to Tate because of the job that he does. He is notable because, to some degree, of his bad arm. And you can see in that image right there that I don't know that we're ever sure what happened to it. One would assume maybe a bullet or something like that, but he cannot move that arm. It is always in the sling, so he has to do everything one-handed. He was a Civil War Union officer at some point. Something happened in the past to his wife. She was killed, apparently by violent means. That's something that does drive him to some degree. He works in a violent profession and in a violent time and place, but he's not a person who is much taken with violence. To some degree, he's a little bit reminiscent of Richard Boone's Paladin character, but not as flashy and not as charismatic. And while that may have contributed to it only getting 13 episodes, story-wise, character-wise, that's not necessarily a bad thing. There are a lot of elements of Have Gun Will Travel in the series, though, and but it's a TV series that avoids a lot of stereotypes of Westerns. Tate's not really, a whiskey drinking, love him and leave him type. Although I think he might have whiskey a couple times in the series. It's not like that, but he comes off very much as like a working man, a sort of blue collar gunfighter. he's an observer of human failings. He makes a living doing things a lot of people don't like, but he's not necessarily like this badass out looking for a fight. But he's a fast gun, and he can handle himself in a fight, even with that arm. The arm was one slight issue, though, for me in the series, because it seems like it should be a lot more important to the story than it is. There's maybe an element of people underestimating him because of the arm, but it rarely seems to hold him back. It doesn't seem like a challenge that he has to overcome, which you kind of think that it maybe would. There's probably an element of, you got a new series, and you got a Western series in a time where there's a lot of Western series on TV. I mean, we're talking 1960s. So, I mean, it's right in the thick of that period, and Westerns in the movies. So maybe there was a feeling that they needed to have a gimmick, something that would catch people's attention. And the gimmick ends up being, his arm. And I don't know. It didn't have a big role in the series like you would have thought that it might have. But you do get, there is a love story in it, but it's not like every episode he's got a new girl or something like that. There are a couple where women are maybe attracted to him or what they think he is, and he's kind of like, I think he's still probably a man who's in love with the wife that he lost, but he also has the kind of business that just doesn't allow for this sort of thing. It's a very grounded Western. It's gritty without being overly gritty. Like the spaghetti Westerns. It's just got a very real feel to it. Very measured, very real. It's about real people. It's about real conflicts, and the right and wrong ways to deal with problems. It doesn't really pull any punches in its examinations of human failings and the human spirit. The plots are, pretty well worn. I mean, again, a lot of Westerns, and we've had a lot of entertainment at this point. There are only so many plots you can do, but they are interesting because it introduces a character like Tate into the situation. How is he going to handle things? How are things going to go? So that does work. It's the Old West. You got the Western towns. You have the saloons. You have the, wide open spaces and all that kind of stuff. So, it's very much of its time, and it's very much about common, ordinary people in the West. Not like, sometimes Bonanza would have like Mark Twain would show up. I actually think Mark Twain showed up in a Rifleman episode too. This series doesn't really do that. It's just about regular, normal, everyday people, who are dealing with life in this, very difficult time period. A lot of good character actor work and a lot of good character actors in the series. Not a lot of really big names. Obviously, David McLean himself is not a really big name. I think a lot of people probably knew his face because of those commercials, but he's not like a major name in entertainment at this point. Again, good for the series, maybe not good though for keeping the series on the air. And violence is not shied away from at all, and it's not glorified in any way, shape, or form. You do have the aspect of Tate being a very fast shot, which, again, you'd see that with, say, Paladin. You kind of know going in, Tate's going to win. Tate knows that too. Now, with Paladin, I always liked how with Paladin, he would tell people straight up, if you pull a gun on me, I'm going to kill you. So you really shouldn't do that. I would prefer if you didn't. And then they'd pull a gun and he'd kill him. Not so much with Tate, but he certainly isn't encouraging it. It's more of a sort of all right, well, this guy wants a gunfight, so I guess we're going to give him a gunfight. We'll just have to deal with that. But so it's a real intimate feel with the characters. And again, it doesn't glorify things. And you have a sequence like this. You have a saloon girl. You have a guy who's obsessed with her. He thinks she's kind of cozying up to Tate. And so he shows up with a rifle. She sees what's happening. The gun fires and she's gone. So being a woman in this series does not spare you from violence. It's about ugly human behavior and what it does. You could set it in other time periods, but I think the West was particularly good for that kind of examination of violence. And you see a lot of that with Clint Eastwood's films too. And Dirty Harry films obviously are not in the Old West. They could be, but he does a lot of that. And I think because things were so lawless and opened up, it makes sense to examine the way people deal with problems in the worst possible way. But like I was saying, you get a lot of very familiar faces, character actors. You don't have a lot of glamour girls in the series. It just looks like regular, normal people is what they were going for. It was that kind of a series, like Decoy. If you look at my review for Decoy, I'll talk about that a little bit too. Interesting faces, real faces, not super ruggedly handsome men and women. You do get some big stars though, but it's big stars before they were big stars in the stage and screen. And one of them is, I got his picture coming up here in a minute. Oh, we do get Julie Adams. So, one glamour girl is in there for sure. Get Martin Landau. You get Leonard Nimoy playing a Native American. Robert Culp playing a really cool bounty hunter. That was one of my favorite roles. You get James Coburn and a very young Robert Redford. And he's actually in a couple different episodes playing different characters. So you do get some people who are going to be a lot bigger later on in their careers. Not that big in 1960 though, which is one of the great things about shows like this. Oh, and of course we also get from Green Acres, Mr. Ziffel. So really the biggest star of all. You also get a couple episodes in the series directed by Ida Lupino, one of the few women directors working in movies, TV at that time. And she made a big impact, and a couple good episodes too. Most of the episodes are directed by Richard Worf. The show very often dials back the drama. It's there. There's a little bit of early 60s, late 50s sort of scenery chewing, but it doesn't go too far down that road. A lot of it really is focusing on, the negative impact of a lack of control over one's emotions. Revenge, hatred, jealousy, and what those kind of things can do to people. It's an examination of violence, where it comes from, the consequences. It never glorifies it. And in that, it's a good show. It's a very solid TV Western. Only 13 episodes. And again, you didn't have a big star. And it was really hard for a Western to sort of have an impact at that time. There were so many on TV, in the movies. And without a major star, with a gimmick that wasn't really that much of a gimmick, with it being very down to earth and real, I can kind of understand why it didn't have the impact that it might have. But at the same time, if it had been more flashy, more dramatic, more of the stereotype of the Western hero or anti-hero, more mustache twirling villains, it wouldn't have been what it is, which is a really solid show about real people, characters, individuals in this violent environment, and often deadly environment, not just struggling to survive, but frankly struggling the way people have throughout the ages, of struggling with themselves, and making poor choices, and oftentimes then suffering for those poor choices. I would probably give Tate a B-. It's above average for sure, and it's worth watching, even though you only get 13 episodes. But I think as a grounded, very real Western, it's an A+. I think compared to a lot of Western series, I think it's better than average, but there are certainly Westerns that you garner more attention, and they garner that attention for a reason, which is why I'd maybe go B-. But if you like it, again, gritty, but not over the top gritty. If you like real stories about real people, I think you get that here. There's a good drama element to it. One other thing, though, that I think does hurt it a little bit is it's a 30-minute show. And there are times where it feels like it gets a little rushed. It feels like they probably could have given you an hour-long show with the material they had, but they had to chop it up a little bit to fit it into that 30-minute slot. That's something you find, too, with detective shows. Sometimes the 30-minute detective shows, like Honey West being a good example, just feels like they're rushing. And this one does feel a little bit rushed sometimes. Not much they could do about that. I think given what they had to work with, they did an excellent job. And I suggest you give Tate a look. You can find it on YouTube, all 13 episodes, in pretty good shape, pretty watchable. Go give it a look. If you do, I'd love to hear in the comments what you think. If this is a show you've watched or that you love, I'd love to hear in the comments your thoughts on it. If you have any questions about the series that I didn't answer in my little review, please ask those questions, and I will address them if I can and as soon as I can. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe, maybe share with a friend. I would really appreciate that. Helps me out quite a bit. In the meantime, until the next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. If you're not, you might run into Tate. And try to have a little bit of fun, and I'll see you next time on Dad's Den of Pop Culture.